Sounds good. All right, here we go. Go ahead, coach, whatever.
Okay. Well, David, it's great to have you. And let's start right with your 8 pillars. Can you share the 8 pillars to help our audience in building trust?
Absolutely. And I think I just give a little opening of, back in the research, there was two sides of it. The first side kind of showed how a lack of trust is the biggest cost in a company, in an organization. It was always a trust issue at the core, right? And the second half of the research then looked at, well, how do you actually build it? And I like to, these 8 C words, they give a language to these 8 pillars, but remember, it's not kind of having this cute list. It's they each represent a very important research funnel, and they're very important to each of everything that comes under building trust comes under these 8, and we use them globally, 6 continents, pro sports teams, companies, salespeople. So here's the 8. Here's how you build trust, and yet I could speak about each of these for a full day at least, so there's a lot under them. Number 1, clarity. People trust the clear, and they mistrust or distrust the ambiguous or the overly complex. So if I overcomplexify something, many people think they're clear when they're not. Even marketing and branding companies do. So this takes work to be clear at the level I'm talking about, but clarity wins. Number 2 is compassion. People trust those that care beyond themselves. I have a hard time trusting someone or following someone or being accountable to someone that doesn't care. Even if they don't care about me, they don't care beyond themselves. Number 3 is character. We trust those that do what's right over what's easy. So, of course, we think, oh, this is character. This makes sense. This has to do with integrity and other things. And yet it's not everything, because I might trust, coach with my kids for the ball game, to take them to the ball game. That doesn't mean I'll trust them to give me a root canal, right? So we have to be competent. And this is the staying fresh and relevant and capable. This is the listening to this great podcast, reading good books, to having a coach, being mentored, going to conferences. This is staying fresh and relevant and competent and capable. Next pillar is commitment. We trust those that stay committed in the face of adversity. There are many like, oh, are you going to leave when the going gets tough? Are you going to leave when this happens? Are you going to leave? We don't trust those that we think are going to jump when there's something tough happening. So we trust those that stay committed. This is where we find the accountability framework for trust, and also where we find how you rebuild trust under this pillar. There are, by the way, there's even more than that, but 42 tools of how we build these pillars. But anyway, the next pillar is connection. We trust those that are willing to connect and collaborate with others. If I go into a company, there are counterforces to these pillars, like siloing is a counterforce to connection. Arrogance is a counterforce to competency. I already know it all, right? Apathy is a counterforce to compassion. And complexity is a counterforce to clarity. So, you can imagine selfishness or siloing can be counterforces to this pillar of connecting. We trust those that are willing to connect and collaborate. The 7th pillar is contribution. And think of it this way: contributors of results. You can't just have compassion and just have character and not contribute results, or I won't trust you. You got to actually do the work. You got to deliver the result. And you know what this is like winning, coach. You can be the kindest coach. You stop winning, it's a problem. I go to a surgeon for an amputation, and they could be compassionate and a lot of other things, cut off the wrong leg. We got a problem. You got to, right? So you got to deliver results. And of course, the final pillar, we call it the queen and king of the pillars, and that is consistency. Sameness is trusted. I want to know you're going to show up the same way every time. You're going to have the same attitude. You're going to bring the same. It's like, by the way, you're trusted for good or bad, right? So if you're late consistently, I will still trust you. It's just I'll trust you to be late, right? So that's the 8-pillar framework. They work together. You could say we've got clarity of vision because we share it at the annual meeting. But if you don't share it consistently every 14 days today, you just lost clarity because you lost consistency. You got commitment issue. If you don't have compassion, you might lose commitment. If Dave will say, but this is the big thing under these 8. If people right now, in this short time we've had together, just write down these 8, put it by their computer, put it by their vehicle, they can put it on your refrigerator, and you see these 8 actually solve the real issue. Because when people say vague words like engagement, this is why I created the trust index. You don't, get engagement with engagement. You increase trust that gets you engagement. It's not net promoter score. You don't get referrals with referrals. You get more trust. You get more referrals. You don't, leadership or anything. You say these big words. Even like David, I know you were a communication undergrad. Isn't it ever a communication issue? You love C words. At the core, it is never a communication issue. Communication's happening all the time. Look at the list. Clear is trusted, unclear isn't. Compassion is trusted, hateful isn't. Honest, is trusted, dishonest or low character isn't. Competent is trusted, incompetent communication isn't. And so if we drill down one more level to these C's, we've learned then we actually have the chance to build trust. And by the way, I'm passionate now because even since we talked last, we've had the admiral say we've dropped suicides rate on Navy ships. We've had a tripling of market share for a company. We've had, engagement scores go up in one of the biggest companies in the world when they shift thinking to trust and start building it.
Yeah, David, I loved your counterforce will in the book, like among so many tools. And this book, I feel that as leaders and managers, we can really use it in day-to-day life. Not only managing our people, but also managing our family. So because family, friends, peers, so many areas. So thank you so much for making those tools. And I love this. Yes.
Yeah.
I love the counterforce will. So as a leader, there is this data from Harvard Review, Business Review, that there are like 74% stress goes down when there is in the organization, the trust is strong. And 106% more energy. People will come up with more productivity. 40% less burnout when they have trust. It's a high trust organization. But sadly, we are observing that in this uncertain world, the trust is now a very, very rare thing. You can see from the elections in Bangladesh. I'm now in Bangladesh, and recently also there was this oppressive regime and 15 years of oppressive regime, and there is now a new interim government, but nobody's trusting anybody.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting combination, and I found out that as a leader, your ODC can also help so many leaders to solve some of these issues. So it would be great if you could just elaborate on that ODC.
Happily.
So our leaders can find.
Let's give some tools. So this is the thing about this book. Trust matters more than ever. It doesn't have the research. What we learned in this time, back when I started the research on trust, almost nobody was doing it in our space. Now there's people talking about trust all over the place. Last 5 years with and mostly without research, frankly, but it's all over the place. So now you got this much, this slim little amount of research and this many tools. What we found people want is they want tools. And those of you that get to hold the book actually, and you can get it audio and all those ways, but it's designed in quick, pithy, do this. The counterforce wheel, you can see it. It's beautifully designed. Oh, let me think about this in my company. These 40 tools that people can use. These are the tools that my certifieds, few hundred of them, use around the world to solve problems. So these tools, ODC, counterforce, SPA, 6 steps to accountability. That's why I wrote it this way, because people wanted to use the tools. So we're sharing them with everyone. Couple things, you said a lot of different things there, and Bangladesh, USA, hey, we got the same trust issues as far as government. One of the boards I'm on is I'm the only non-senator, non-representative from Congress that 4 or 5 times a year we go out to DC and we bring together Republicans and Democrats. Believe it or not, there are some, and there is hope in spite of what people think and are saying. So they're not the ones on the news every night that are trying to get their face on they're ones that actually came in with a relatively pure heart and want to work together. And there are a few handfuls of those in spite of what people think. So I have to just bring that up because I've seen people work together, and I could go off on a whole nother podcast of how we are incentivized against trust on Capitol Hill compared to even 50 years ago in America, and the reasons for that. And that might be an interesting one, but we want to get to the tools today, which is what you asked for. So let's talk about ODC. ODC comes, by the way, if there's a gifting, and there's plenty of things I'm not gifted at, but I think it was growing up as a farm kid that, yes, I love coming from research and not just kind of motivation out of my head. but I need to be able to use that tool tomorrow morning to shovel that stuff, or it's not worth it. I need to use it. So that's one thing we hear all the time is our tools. I could use them to solve that problem. I use them to solve that problem. In fact, in the back of the book, you'll see find a problem. Oh, conflict. Oh, tool number whatever. Here's how I build trust in conflict. Here I build trust here. So the ODC one, the problem people have that it's confronting is expectations. One of the biggest frustrations we hear in companies is that with employees is they feel like their manager wasn't clear about expectations. So this comes against that. This is a little process, and I learned it myself because I was a leader. I had many strikes against me. And the first time I had a real leadership role, I was younger than almost all my staff. It was in another part of the country that I wasn't overly welcome in. They were all native, and I wasn't from there, and I wasn't getting what I wanted from my team. And finally, I figured out whose fault it was, mine, because I wasn't clear about what I was expecting. And if you don't give a clear target, they can never hit it. So under the expectation portion, this is a tool under the clarity pillar. And it is, if I'm thinking through expectations, I just simply think through ODC. What's the O, outcome? How clearly can I paint that outcome? This is what I like. See, a lot of us, we come in and say, well, you have to do it like this. Yeah, we're micromanaging a lot of things and we're not clear about the outcome. We want them to do the thing this way, but we're not clear about the outcome, which is what we really want. So get clear about that outcome as clear as you can. And many people could be clear and they argue with me, well, I don't know what the end of the project will look like. Fine. What do you know? And get clear about that. That's O. D stands for deadline. Deadline, it needs to be a specific time with a minute. Not, okay, so can we see this soon? What's that mean to you? What's that mean to me? Can I see this 10 a.m. Friday? Can I see this Monday before our meeting? That's that, because I thought that giving a deadline would create conflict when not giving a deadline ensures you get conflict. The C stands for clarifiers, a space where you say, are we on the same page about this? Do you have any questions? Are we clear? Am I clear about what I want? Can you spit it back to me? And just that simple little process gives people hope because people actually want to win. And when they have the outcome and they have a deadline, they have a chance at winning. Or in the clarifiers, you can say, I don't think I could do that, but then could we change it to this? And there's a conversation. I'll just I think giving grit to these helps. Like an example. Can I give a quick one?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to our home. This stuff works. This trust stuff actually works at home. I have 4 kids. My daughters and I, and my wife and I, and our daughters had a different perspective on what a clean room looks like. So I remember they were very young, maybe 5, 7 years old to the girls, and the girls stay in a room, the boys stay in a room. Okay. So I said, let's make it simple and clear. And I don't want to be a domineering dad. I just want to be clear. So let's have it be just 2 things. 1, no clothes on the floor. Do you know what clothes are? Oh, yeah, Dad, we know. And do you know what the floor is? I know you haven't seen it for a while, but it's under those clothes. Okay? Got it. Number 2, your bed. There's a bedspread or a top comforter that goes over the top of the pillow and everything. Just that top over the top. I don't know what's going on underneath. I don't know what bunnies or little things you got under it. Fine. Just pull the top one over. Are we clear? Yep, we're clear, Dad. So the first time we help them clean the room and find their floor, and then, do the thing. And okay, we know what it looks like. So the first Saturday, there was a deadline, Saturday morning. Dad, hey, they come downstairs. Can we go play with our friends? Can we play with our... Yes, it's a free Saturday. We're not going anywhere. You can. But do you have a clean room? Whoa, and all of a sudden, and 5-year-olds could, on those 2 things, an ODC could go up and say, oh yeah, it's not, oh yeah, I got to put the floor, I got to put okay, now I come, yep, it's clean, right? I don't know about the plastic necklaces on the beer. I don't know what was going on in the closet, but those 2 things, we got it. And that gave them hope, that gave them success, so you can do that same thing at work. And by the way, don't overlook it. People need clear expectations to win.
So true.
Yeah. Hey, trust matters now more than ever. And David, you actually wrote about that in your book. You gave 10 really powerful reasons why trust matters now more than ever. And I got to admit, I was a little skeptical when I first read your statement. I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of like how they say, this is the most important election in the history of elections, right? Like, I was curious about, your points, but then when you made those 10 points, that really drove home your point about why trust now in the 21st century actually does matter more than ever. Could you share a couple couple of those points and your thoughts on why trust is so relevant today?
Well, first of all, I want to honor you with the thought of that idea because I actually had problems with it myself because people always said to me, oh, wow, that trust stuff is so timely. And I would always think it is timely, but it's timeless. It actually has always mattered. And I do say that at the top of the list, I actually believe it's always mattered, but there are ways it matters differently today, and that has made it matter more. I mean, simple examples are not very long ago, a CEO could have a breach of trust and it only touched their company. Now, the moral failure of a CEO might affect the whole industry and even the globe, right? The connectedness. We see this happen on the electrical grid. The grid, when it went down in the Northeast, actually had impacts on much of the world, even Europe, because the connectedness and technology and all those things. So that's one reason it matters more than ever. In the US, I can speak to, and we do a global study every year that most years it's global, but I can speak to this part just US. So with apologies to the rest of the world, but how there's a load of depression and other disease because of connectedness in human connectedness going down and technological connectedness going up. And it turns out we need to be able to build trust, and many just avoid it. And so they have really terrible human relationships. And so we see that the Surgeon General, you can see it in the book, what's happening, all kinds of terrible things because of a lack of ability even to build trust, because they have a really strong ability in their index finger to scroll, but not a strong ability to build trust and connectedness, which is way more important to long life and a host of other things. So there's two.
That's great. Hey, Dave, how about for the young leader that takes over and has the opportunity to build their team? What advice would you give that leader in trying to bring the right people onto their team?
There are three parts of culture, of building a great culture. And as a mentor friend of mine says, David, you deal in one of the smallest parts, which is leadership and talent development, and then annual reviews, that whole piece. So you have development, you have accountability. And he says, that's 10% each. Number one, most important, 80% of culture is built on the hiring process. So you got to hire right. So one thing we've been, and I've thought about with companies and worked on with companies is, how do you hire against the 8 pillars? How do you hire clarity? How do you decide what does high character look like here? How do you measure that ahead of time and hire on that? And so I would hire on trust. You can do it. You actually can assess it in certain ways. And predictive index assesses some parts, but you have to use both questions and a hiring process that gets to the 8-pillar framework. But I'll give one tip right away. And that's a big mistake people make. And this comes under clarity. And that is, you have to be super clear about the job description of what you wanted ahead of time. Many people jump in and think, I like that person, or they're available. Oh yeah, I think we could make that work. And they hire the wrong person because they didn't start with, but this is actually what we need the most. This is what their behaviors look like. This is what their experience look like. Now let's look for that and get that. The other thing is, I never hire unless I don't want to hire unless I've interviewed at least broke it down to at least 3 people for an interview, 3 final candidates to choose from. If you just have a final of 1, you're like, well, it'll help. It'll work. It'll be something, it's probably as good as we can get. Not a good idea. Keep going until you have 3 to interview face-to-face. And so, we've gotten much clearer about the interview process. That would come under clarity, but it affects all the others, so a couple ideas.
David, just delve in. How about 1 or 2 questions you found that have been really effective in the interview process?
Well, the questions align with who you are and who you want to be. So I don't know, on the spot, now Dan runs this so much that I'm trying to think about what it would be. I don't think one thing that I don't think works very good is cutesy things like, leave a dollar bill and see if they give it back to you. Like it can be manipulated, some of those things that people have made up. I'm going to give 2 ideas and then I will give a question. one idea, though, that's worked really well for us is having them practice the thing that, like, we have. I wish I had the whole hiring process out here, because we have the question. Dan does several questions, and then he does Zoom interviews, and then they come in for interviews. So my process actually is more of a gut feel, but he's vetted them down with all these other specific processes that make an alignment of values and all that. But you need to align against values. So we follow very closely in part of it. We've mixed 3 different kind of books and studies, but one of the parts is Patrick Lencioni's Hungry, Humble, and Smart, Ideal Team Player. That fits very closely with what we want here. Hungry, humble, and smart. Now, we have virtues that we look at. So we have our values in the company. That's outbound. But people, what we expect here is people that are joyfully willing. We figure out, we want to figure it out mentality. I remember I had an assistant one time that would ask me all these questions, and finally, lovingly, and she's very, we still are friends, and she said, that was the best job I ever had, or you're the best. She said some very kind things. But in those days, I said early on, and she's not here anymore, but she said, she would ask me all these questions, and I said the name, and then I said, you have 20 questions this week. Pick wisely. And I wanted her basically to just, it wasn't that I don't want to coach or help, but I'm flying out all the time. I want her to think on her own. If possible, Google that or ask somebody else. And then there's going to be some that you have to ask me, because I'm the only one that knows, right? So that it's kind of a funny joke we still have, that figure it out mentality. Like I gotta check, I gotta try. And we're a small institute, so we need to work on that. But the other tip that gets to competency pillar is, if at all possible, test the competency in what they're doing there. Many people only do this with assistants, and they can actually test it. By the way, same thing on character. You can measure character in many ways. People think you can't, as long as you have it defined where you are. But competency, here's an example. So with the executive assistant role, there's things that they're going to need to do. So they'll build a PowerPoint without much knowledge, and they have 30 minutes, and then they have to get it to Dan, and we see what it looks like. They write an email to a CEO. We give them a little framework, and then we see what it looks like. Of course, we're going to train them more, but we want to know they can do certain things in a certain way. One thing, here's the figure it out mentality, and we haven't done this for a while, but here's an example. I had a couple great employees one time, and we were hiring. It was actually executive assistant role. And you remember Ryan, I think, Jim Johnson, and he was great too. And he was chief operations. We're still friends and everything. And I've got a great, COO now with Dan. But Ryan was great. He would get things done fast. I said, Ryan, here's a task. We have this person we work closely with, but we don't know her maiden name, and her mother just died in some other state that I don't even know where the funeral is. I know nothing, and they're not at their home anymore. But I need you to send flowers. So let's do an ODC. Outcome. I want flowers there. I want them from Lisa and I and the team, and I want them there by the funeral. Okay? That's the outcome. The deadline is by the funeral. Okay? I want you to do it. Find out how long it takes for you till you hit the button of this unknown address, this unknown state, but this is our chief designer, and she's not even on the team. She's just a vendor, but she's very close to us. So I said, he called back. He said, don't do it. I said, it took me 15 minutes. I said, okay, now with this one, we're the finalist we have, do that with her and let her do it all the way through and time her, but don't tell her. She did it 9 minutes. Anne was, as you know, also, Jim, Anne was one of the best employees we've ever had. And of course, she's got a couple kiddos now and being at home more and all that. But she was here for 7 or 8 years. But we saw the figured out mentality to that test that was somewhat real.
Yeah. Right. Hey, David, one of the pillars that really stood out to me was commitment, especially with, my generation being in my mid-20s and seeing how we're bouncing around, or even relationships sometimes were lacking commitment in those areas too as a generation. I think that's such an important pillar of trust. And talk a little bit more about that pillar and why you decided to include it.
Well, I mean, each of these pillars, while there's overlap, for instance, commitment and character have some similar overlap. Compassion and connection could have, to become their own pillar. I did not want 8. anybody would tell you that's way too many to sell. It's too much. It's too long of a list. It's too much to speak on. But if they had enough data that pointed to them separately, I also speak on trust and I need to be honest and true. So it was 8, right? So there was enough about commitment that separated it from, we saw the value of trust and sticking with it. I think one of the challenges, and there are lots of values that the new generation brings, lots, but I do think many are missing out on what happens when you commit, because they're to our character, to our relationship, rich relationships. If you have a rich relationship with someone, it happened because you didn't leave when it was tough sometime. And they are missing out on that growth. And many are missing out on the richness that a relationship can have when you've had a few valleys and when you've stayed. There's an organization that I work with that I love, but they move their leadership about every 3 years. And it's just the way it is, and it's part of the culture. And the problem that happens is someone that's not very good, they'll just say, well, in a couple of years, they won't coach them, they won't mentor them, they won't fire them. And so poison stays in the organization because they're like, oh, they're going to leave soon anyway. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to let it go. And there's a lot of challenge that happens when I know I've got to be committed anyway. It's like my dad would say, your neighbors are your neighbors. They're your neighbors. So we had a guy that was, a drunken welder. And so on our farm, we needed welding done. He would come, he would overcharge. He would say he was there at 6 a.m. when he wasn't. And I watched my dad. Sometimes there's a place for accountability, but sometimes there's a place of just saying, I got to work with what we got or we lose the whole farm. And he would stay committed to that person. And they built a friendship and they grew. And he's like, if there was any other place in the world, you would have hired a second welder. But when we live 8 miles from the nearest town of 500 people on a dirt road that no one can make it to, you lose the farm if you don't water it. And you got to work with that. And something beautiful happened because he stayed committed to this person. And that's what I think a lot of people are missing out on with commitment. And that, we can so easily get out of relationships, get out of marriages, leave jobs, move. And people are missing out on the best of themselves and the richness of relationships and what they could become. And you see, frankly, as much as I am for the younger generation, you see an immaturity of character because they didn't stick with ever when it got tough, and that hurt themselves. I'm going to give one tip here though, and that's under the commitment pillar. There's 2 other ways. You asked how I think about it. 2 of the key tools in this pillar box, in this tool box, are the accountability framework, which is how do I help others stay committed, basically. How do we hold? Because many organizations have no accountability, which is a problem, or micromanaging poisonous accountability. I see it all the time. You almost never see healthy accountability, yet you can't have a high trust company or organization or team without it. And so there's 6 steps to that. That's one thing I would highlight. The other thing that I would highlight is how do you rebuild trust once you've lost it? I just said commitment, you got to stick with commitment. I make mistakes. I speak on this trust stuff. I study this trust stuff. I'm totally imperfect at living it out. So I've got to rebuild trust. I've got to, in the institute, over, those people right through that wall, but with my kids, whatever. So one tip I will give that everybody can learn in 1 minute is, while there's a 10-step process for rebuilding trust, whether you're an individual or you're a company with an oil spill, it comes down to one thing, and it fits under this pillar, and that is the only way you rebuild trust. It's not the apology. I'm sorry I'm late. No, you're not. You're late every time. We can apologize. I'm not saying don't do apologies. There's a way to open communication with them, but it is not the way you ever rebuild trust. The only way you will ever rebuild trust, ever, 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 is when you make and keep a new commitment. So that fits under this pillar.